distinguished presenters, conference participants, distingués conférenciers, chair participants, welcome to Annapolis Royal, the Annapolis Valley, and to this very timely conference on local prosperity. Bienvenue à Annapolis Royal, la vallée d'Annapolis, et à cette conférence traitant la prospérité locale. Our current economic model is inherently biased against small, cooperative, and local economies, and it creates significant economic and lifestyle challenges for rural Canada. From the arrival of the French in 1605, the area saw the emergence of an economy based on the natural resources available. Dès l'arrivée des Français en 1605, l'économie de la région s'est développée basée sur les ressources naturelles disponibles. Forestry, fishing, and farming became the long-term economic drivers through the centuries. And it is clear now that we have not been as careful as we could have been with these resources. Much has changed since 1605, and we continue to learn from the Mi'kmaq, who managed land well from the beginning, and from new economic thinking, and from new leadership. This conference will explore fresh ideas that can rebalance the local economy and stimulate local prosperity in a spirit of true community engagement. Cette conférence va explorer des nouvelles idées qui vont relancer l'économie locale et stimuler la prospérité engageant la communauté. Proclaimed this 9th day of April in this year of grace 2015 by me, Peter Crofton Davis, Town Crier for the town of Annapolis Royal and the municipality of Annapolis County. God bless a free and united Canada. Long live the Queen! It is now my pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Annapolis Royal, His Worship Michael Tonkin.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Town and Council, I would like to welcome you to the town of Annapolis Royal. This is where history meets opportunity. I would also like to welcome you to the Annapolis Royal Regional Academy, the building we are standing in here tonight. 9 days ago, this was still a school. It was controlled by the school board. And now we're having a conference here, which I think is absolutely incredibly amazing. This is just showing us another opportunity that's available for rural Nova Scotia. I've always been a strong proponent of rural communities creating their own development and working together as a region. And this is something that, since I was elected in 2012, has been growing and growing over the last couple of years. Counties are working with towns, and towns are working with counties, and counties are working with other counties. And it's something that you didn't see 14 years ago or 10 years ago. And they're looking at working as a region, developing as a region, and showcasing us as a region, which I think is highly important. This offsets what has been pressure to centralize our infrastructure, our schools, our businesses to our cities and strip them out of our rural communities. So when Gregory came to me and presented this idea of running a conference on rural development, but running it in a rural town, it was you know, an amazing idea. It had the potential of showcasing what rural Nova Scotia can do, and I thought it was just, you know, something that we had to participate in and help them with. And now, was it easy for them? No, there was a lot of struggles, and I mean, we've had an incredible winter that they've overcome, and I think this organizational group should be applauded for what they've succeeded in doing here. While here, I do hope that you guys have the opportunity to explore Annapolis Royal, to shop and eat and meet the residents of our town and area. It makes us quite unique, and the opportunities that are here for now and in our future, I think are going to be overwhelming. So thank you very much. I hope this conference is an amazing success. I'm hearing so far that it's been that today. So congratulations again, Gregory, and welcome to Annapolis.
Well, thank you very much for making an effort to come to one of the more beautiful places in the world. This has been an interesting ride over the last, I think we started at least thinking about this almost a year ago, trying to figure out if the time is right, what the place ought to be, and I think I'm convinced that this is the time is right for this sort of idea, and it's generated a tremendous interest. We started this morning over in Cornwallis at the Annapolis Basin Conference Center with our upskilling event, and David Wimberly, who organized that, it absolutely exceeded all of our expectations. I think there were nearly 180 people at that event. We were thinking we could handle maybe 120, but it was a stellar event, and it was a hands-on exercise in local economy. I'm not going to elaborate too much because I'd like to get to our keynote speakers. This is really the opening event of the main conference here, and we've got 2.5 days of workshops. And I think what we're going to try and do tonight is kind of set the grander vision, and then we will continue to drill down for the next 2.5 days in breakout sessions and topic tables, where people really have an opportunity to sit down with one another and exchange ideas. One of the things that I think that we wanted to do different is in a sense do less talking and more organizational work, more activist work, where people can really get together and share ideas. When we started to put together our panels, and I think we've got 42, 44 panelists that you'll be introduced to over the next 2.5 days, we were just thinking one thing, that we wanted panelists who actually have done something, that had made something work in their community that really led towards a more prosperous future for particularly rural areas. And so all these panelists have a wealth of knowledge of things that have actually worked. And you put that dynamic together, and I think some magic can happen. My interest in this really started 1.5 years ago or so, and there are just 3 little quotes that I want to give you that stuck with me. Donald Savoy was, who I think is kind of the father of economic development in Atlantic Canada, wrote this in the Nova Scotia 2010 Jobs Here report. He said, "We are at the stage of trying various measures to see what works and what does not work." And that was my indication that we haven't really figured out yet what a truly prosperous rural economy looks like, or how it performs. So the challenge is still there. And his kind of mentor in his work was a man named Edward Blakely. And he stated this. He said, "There is increasing national argument that the experiments of the 1980s and 1990s, based on free market, export-based economics and the like, have transformed and weakened local and regional economies." In 2003, the Royal Commission on Renewing and Strengthening Our Place in Canada wrote this: "Rural and regional development have proven a difficult nut to crack. For all the attention paid to rural and regional development strategies, there has been little coherent debate in Canada about the future of rural places. I think my hope is that tonight we can make a good start on opening up a true dialogue on the future of rural Canada. An interesting little exercise I'd like to try for a second. This was passed on to me from a couple people. And I'd like you to try this for a moment. I'd like you to just comfortably cross your arms. Larry Powell you can't do this and photograph at the same time. Everyone got them crossed there? Okay, now you kind of look down and make note of which arm's on top and what's on the bottom. Get that figured out. Kind of drop them down at the side for a second. Now I'd like you to cross them the other direction. Put the other one on top. And I think that the point of this is a couple things. First of all, you've got to think about it for just a second. And then I tell you, it feels quite strange. But after a while, it doesn't feel quite so strange. For me, the point of the exercise, I think a lot of the things that you'll hear in the next 2.5 days may seem very new and perhaps a bit strange. But if you take the time to really let them soak in, I think magical things are possible. So tonight we have two great keynote speakers. And I'm not going to say, I'm not really good about the long biographies of speakers, but the two speakers we have tonight have done some very rich, rewarding things over many years. The first gentleman is really a natural history writer. And I came across his books a long time ago, books on natural history, on water, great book on the Sahara Desert, a book called Windswept on weather. And then all of a sudden I pick up a book or hear about a book, it's called Our Way Out, on a kind of a post-carbon look at the economy. And I thought, that's kind of a strange thing for a natural history writer to write about. But it's not. It all kind of fit together, the land and the water and the weather and economics. So it became for me a watershed book for me. It was very readable. And so I made the effort to go down to Eagles Head, Nova Scotia, and had a marvelous lunch, maybe 2 glasses of wine, with a wonderful gentleman, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mark de Villiers.
If I'm hobbling a bit, it's because I'm on Nova Scotia's interminable waiting list for a new hip, so forgive me. I'm grateful to be invited. I'm basically, just a journalist, and that's what I write about what I know. But and the chance to be the kind of warm-up act for the eminent Michael Schumann is quite an honor for me. So I'm going to start with a couple of sweeping generalizations, which may have nothing to do, or apparently nothing to do with what the subject of this conference is, and then we'll maybe get into a few injunctions, which may be a little more focused. But the first of my sweeping generalizations, I'm not going to have time to explain it, you're just going to have to listen, because it would take most of the last book to explain it. The first one is this: economic growth is not the solution. Growth is the enemy. Growth remains the unexamined orthodoxy. Only a few renegade economists are today asking the most basic questions, such as those posed by John Maynard Keynes more than 80 years ago. I quote, If growth is the means to an end, what is the end? How much growth is enough? And what other valuable human purposes may be preempted by a single-minded concentration on economic growth? Unquote. Keynes looked forward to the day in which the economic problem, as he called it, by which he meant the problem of consumption and production, was a thing of the past. We are essentially there in rich societies, he said. There's more than enough for everyone. In other words, there was no need to grow anymore. It's true that a growth economy falls into recession when it stops growing. But just because an airplane falls to the ground when it stops moving forward doesn't preclude the invention of helicopters. I liked the economist Herman Daly's formulation: we must replace the axiom, more is better, with the much sounder axiom, enough is best. The second of my sweeping generalizations is this: is to see bargain hunting for the socially destructive activity it has become. In our rather muddled world, the search for cheaper, the thrift has mutated into the endless search for cheaper stuff. And this search for bargains has driven down wages, led to offshoring of manufacturing, led to the globalized search for ever cheaper workforces. It has led to a world in which advertising tells greater and greater lies. It has led to a world in which predatory discounters routinely drive small businesses into bankruptcy, devastating small towns everywhere. It has led, in the end, to Walmart, the world's largest retailer and arch pusher of vast amounts of what Adam Smith called the endless pursuit of unnecessary things. What is lost in this rush for cheap is this: workmanship and product integrity are lost, paying jobs are lost, and workers who feel good about themselves and where they work. A good corporate citizen is lost, and with its tax base for another small town. In a larger sense, a culture that understood standards, workmanship, and the value of craft is degraded, along with the apparently obsolete capitalist notion that competition leads to stronger, more highly evolved industries through the process of creative destruction. Instead, we get price wars and the relentless erosion of standards. We get big box stores with no roots and no conscience. We get the commodification of jobs that has ravaged the middle classes and what used to be called the working classes when they were still working. The third of my sweeping injunctions is a little simpler. The third is to understand that human rationality is a commodity in very short supply. And that, as the Guardian columnist Ben Goldacre once put it, telling people to do the right thing is a spectacularly weak way to change behavior. All right. I have a few injunctions. The first injunction is this: small communities should avoid the trap of scale. A few months ago, late last summer, a new factory opened in a northern Nova Scotia community, I don't even remember which community it was now because it wasn't important, promising 200 new jobs. And it was interesting to see the commentary that followed this opening. Hardly anyone mentioned what this factory was actually going to make. Didn't seem to be important. No, the ribbon cutting and self-congratulation made it clear that it was the jobs that were important, not their purpose. This is, of course, familiar. Anyone who lives in an area of high unemployment, and this is quite a number of us now, knows that we need jobs not because society needs the things that these people are employed to make, but so that the employed people can earn money to buy things that other people can then be employed to produce. It is an apparently endless consumerist spiral that depends on economic growth for its salvation. I've argued elsewhere, we can't go into it now, that we need to move to a steady-state economy defined for this purpose as an economy that doesn't fall into recession when growth fails. But the trap of scale, for its part, is represented by a single large employer whose demise or withdrawal from the community is automatically devastating. And I have a real example from the small community where I live. And it wasn't even a call center, it was a real business. Bowater Mersey's newsprint mill in Brooklyn, Queens County, near where I live, was closed by its parent a few years ago after 86 years of operation. Its parent wasn't by any means local anymore. It was sold to a larger company and then sold to yet another large company called Resolute Forest Products. It was the only large employer in the town. More than 300 direct and almost 2,000 indirect jobs were immediately lost. The company closed the mill and in the aftermath refused even to contemplate selling it to another paper manufacturer who were contemplating buying it and restarting it. They refused to sell to such a company because that would be creating competition for the rest of their own mills elsewhere. So they wouldn't allow this mill to be kept open. So loyal workers, for 3 generations, loyal workers be damned. Families be damned, community be damned, only the shareholders count. This is not unusual anymore. This is normal. It works this way because the people who employ people and the people so employed don't any longer live in the same community or have the same interests. In most cases in the corporate world, people who invest in companies haven't the slightest idea where those factories are or what they do. The disconnect is this double. Corporations are ruthless and almost always heartless, with the heart of a bank vault, in a phrase from the Depression. A more resilient economy, which is what we're talking about, is one whose employment is more diffuse and less prone to catastrophic failure, and one that is rooted in the community, points that Mr. Schumann has been making eloquently for decades. This is what small towns and non-urban communities are well positioned to bring about. This is sometimes called economic gardening, a nice phrase. Grow the economy from inside through small companies, startups, and growth, and not through imports. If those native companies can then grow, so much the better. But they're not a failure if they don't. Similarly with export markets. If your people can devise businesses that can compete internationally and reach export markets, well and good. But don't grow for the sake of growing. Community-based businesses are just fine. You have not failed if you fail to export. The other side of this coin is, of course, buy local whenever and wherever you can. Buying local, if we all do it, and if we are allowed to do it by regulation and trade agreements, is much of the battle. Second injunction, build on skills and attributes that already exist in the community. Start with what is native to the place. The most striking example you've probably been reading about is Zita Cobb and her work on Fogo Island in Newfoundland. Okay, it helps in her case that she's a returning prodigal daughter who, with a finely tuned sense of history and belonging, but also, happily, with very large sums of money. That doesn't hurt either. Still, her attitude in developing Fogo Island is exactly right. She's financed the Shorefast Foundation, she calls it, whose aim is to build the resilience of small communities. In her case, in Fogo Island's case, this means concentrating on art, sustainable tourism, and community-based microfinance as the means of community revitalization. As she puts it, the raw beauty of the island and the knowledge and skills of the people are part of what make it so special. These elements she calls, quote, sacred capital, unquote, and are incorporated into every aspect of her endeavors on the island. Residents who know and love the communities need to harness these special qualities and turn them into businesses. And this is, I think, her important point. I don't see how small communities are going to survive if we're not willing to get involved in the business world, she said. Figure out what it is that this community has that differentiates it, that makes it special, that makes it love it, and then work with that. Look at what we have in abundance. Skilled craftspeople, a deep reservoir of artists, committed workers, a strong work ethic, natural beauty, and a relatively pristine environment. And maybe some snow, too. We've got that, too. Third injunction, Pay attention to design. Now, this seems trivial, but it really isn't. All our communities have something to love about them, but commercial strip malls dominated by parking lots ain't one of them. Nova Scotia, like the other maritime provinces, has a wonderful idiosyncratic vernacular architecture authentically ours. Cherish it and encourage it. This doesn't mean nostalgia only for the past. It means building on something special we already have. Design also means paying attention to planning. We should design for neighborhoods that are human-scaled and help to segregate cars. Design against cars and for livable communities. Design mixed-use neighborhoods. Work again with whatever is native. That's what Fogo Island is doing, and producing, by the way, some stunning modern architecture along the way. Injunction number 4, we need to start with the right attitude. We need to assert to ourselves and to city people and to whoever will listen that rural does not mean backward, doesn't mean nostalgia. The point is not to return to some simple agrarian model. We're a wide world and it works. We need the globalization of ideas, the import-export of visions, local sustainability and international connectivity. We want to keep young people in our communities. But we're not going to do it by looking backwards to some imagined bucolic past. Young people need access to quality information, ideas, sophistication, and laughter. To do this, connectivity is everything. Broadband everywhere, we should accept no less. With it, you can stay rural and be part of the world. That's what localization should mean to me. You probably know of the online shopping community called Etsy. Anyone know this? If you don't, we can talk about it later in a discussion, if you like. But Etsy is basically a small website where local artisans can have virtual shops where they can produce. Mom and pop stores can reach an international audience. It's a very obvious model for some of us to copy. We want localization to restore prosperity to our communities. That's what this conference is about. But localization is also driven by an increased yearning for something better than the mass dislocations and grotesque disparities of contemporary culture, emphasized even more by the hollowing out of the economy exemplified by the banking crisis of 2008. These two purposes reinforce each other. Number 5, therefore, pay attention to education. Education is absolutely key. Closing rural schools is a disaster. I was horrified to learn there was a conference in Halifax a week ago, and a person, Kate Oland, who is a nice combination of farmer and librarian, I thought that was a nice, told a Halifax conference that the struggle of her community, Middle River, to save its small 2-room classroom. Part of the distant school board's rationale for closing it was the lack of a basketball court, a cafeteria, and an intercom system. A 2-room school closing because it hasn't got an intercom system. Can't you walk next door or shout? Whatever happened to shout? Anyway, teaching was not mentioned once in the board's closure recommendation. The school in Tiny Mill Village, where I live, on the Medway River has been closed because a school board assessment said it would take almost $100,000 to bring its washrooms up to standard. Well, the father of one of the pupils, who happens to be my plumber, and he's a plumber, said he could do it easily for $8,000 and still make a profit. Seriously though, school boards worrying about things like that indicate the size and scale of the problem. That we should stop worrying about the hardware. Teaching is all important. Find good teachers, that's the key. It doesn't matter whether the damn desks are uncomfortable or not. And then don't teach kids to fill jobs that may never materialize. Encourage skepticism instead. Let the kids experiment. And we should pay attention to the innovations coming out of the major universities called massive open online courses, or MOOCs. Watch for how they can be adapted to non-urban communities. Number 6, fight overregulation. This is one of Michael's points. I'm sure he'll get at that. There's far too much regulation, we know that. Far too much protecting of vested interests. We need to back off. This is largely a provincial and federal problem, but people like you can bring pressure to bear. If a farmer wants to raise 51 turkeys instead of 50, let her do it. If a small-town butcher wants to slaughter animals for his clients, let them decide whether to shop there. Don't close thriving businesses. Peninsula Farms of Lunenburg County was closed because it couldn't afford the multiple thousands of dollars of new processing equipment deemed necessary to continue producing the ice creams that it had been producing for decades. Let these unnecessary regulations were produced in faraway Ottawa. In my view, let Ottawa worry about Mike Duffy and leave us alone. We all worry we worry too much about too many trivial things. People should be allowed to run whatever businesses they want, anywhere they want, out of their homes if necessary. Not just with minimal regulation, but with active encouragement. With possible exception of land use bylaws to protect farmland, zoning regulation should be either eased, if not abolished altogether. 5 more minutes? No, I'm getting there. Number 7, this is the obvious one, and the person from FarmWorks, Linda Best, is she here? Anyway. We need to get farming and fishing back in balance. We need the relocalization of food. We need to get it closer to the consumer and make it healthier. We need educated farmers and, more important, educated consumers. We need enough farmers and farms, which means subsidizing small farmers, not conglomerates. It means more local farms and more local farm markets. It means more co-ops so small farmers can band together and generate marketing muscle. Small farms are no longer horse and buggy operations after all. Small farmers employing a much sophisticated technology. Even smallish dairy farms and cattle breeders these days store fertilized cow ova in hollow straws kept in liquid nitrogen. We should actively encourage, this is probably going to annoy a lot of you, but we should actively encourage, and certainly don't discourage, research into the genetic modification of food that can design better yielding and hardier crops. Farmers markets, you've all got almost every community now has a farmers market. There's one here on Saturday, I believe. Can be seen as a new old way of retailing food, vendors with a direct connection to buyers, selling things they actually grow or make themselves. And this can be extended indefinitely through all commercial and social life. Once you have local food, a more democratic local government, a more distributed energy grid, more local manufacturing, once you have all those things, the apparently fuzzy notion of rebuilding communities to a human scale becomes ever more possible and even probable. Relocalizing farming will therefore force-feed localization in other areas, particularly industry, and will re-energize community life. Reinventing communities also has obvious knock-on effects in democratic governance, which brings me to my last point. We need to involve or to re-involve the citizenry in governance. We need to increase the democratic quotient of what we all do. At least on the local level, we need to get closer to participatory democracy rather than the variant we have now, which is representative democracy. Virtually nothing should be conducted in camera. Transparency and openness are essential. Post everything online. Invite participation from the citizens. Localization of politics begins with this community and communities such as yours. Now, real democracy is messy, sloppy, argumentative, and time-consuming. Remember what Oscar Wilde said about socialism. It's all very well, but it takes too many evenings. But it is worthwhile. It is where everything begins. Thank you.